With less than 4 months until Election Day, everyone is discussing the possible outcome of the US presidential election. In this video, we'll examine the latest polls and provide an early prediction of the results. Stay tuned. After President Biden's poor performance in last month's debate, many believe that Trump has a strong chance of winning back the presidency. Meanwhile, some Democrats are suggesting replacing Biden on the ticket. As this discussion continues, we must look at the polls to assess each candidate's chances of winning. First, let's check the nation polls. While nationwide polls may not hold as much weight as the state-level polls in the USA, they still provide valuable insights into trends that can guide our understanding. Trump has maintained his lead for almost a year. While in some instances, Biden managed to reduce this gap to less than 1%, Trump widened his gap in recent polls, and there is a 3.3% lead in average polls for Trump. Trump has 47.3% compared to Biden's 44%. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is also in the race, and many believe that overlooking him would be a mistake as he gained approximately 10% support in polls when voters had the opportunity to consider him. Therefore, when examining polls where respondents were presented with other candidates besides Trump and Biden, Trump's support shrinks to 42.8% and Biden's to 38.3%, widening the gap between the frontrunners to 4.5%. Now let's assess the current electoral landscape based on recent polls. We classify states into 7 categories. First, there are safe states for Democrats and Republicans, indicating states where polls show a margin of more than 15% and where the state consistently votes for a particular party in recent presidential elections. Next, we have likely states for either party, where based on previous voting pattern and current polls, we can confidently predict a winner with a significant degree of certainty. There are also states where polls consistently show a lead by one party, but the margin falls between 5 to 10%. We classify these states as leaning Democrat or Republican. Lastly, we have the battleground or toss-up states. In these states, the gap between Biden and Trump is around or less than 5%. And they are crucial in the Electoral College as they ultimately determine the outcome of the presidential election. Let's now see which states fall into each category. The safe states for Democrats are Vermont, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, Delaware, Maryland, D.C., Washington, Oregon, California, and Hawaii. Turning to the safe states for the Republicans, they include Montana, Idaho, Utah, Wyoming, North and South Dakota, Nebraska at the state level along with its 1st and 3rd congressional districts, Kansas, Oklahoma, Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, Indiana, West Virginia, Maine 2nd congressional district, and Alaska. Based on this assessment, Democrats have secured 119 safe electoral votes compared to 117 safe votes for Republicans. In the likely states category, Democrats can expect to win Colorado, Illinois, New York, and the 1st congressional district of Maine. Conversely, likely red states include South Carolina, Ohio, and Iowa. Taking these electoral votes into account, Democrats would have a total of 177, while Republicans would have 149 votes. Now let's look at the leaning states. Leaning Democrat states include New Mexico, the 2nd congressional district of Nebraska, Virginia, New Hampshire, Maine at the state level, and New Jersey. For the Republicans, we have Texas and Florida. With these leaning electoral votes in consideration, Republicans would hold a lead with 219 electoral votes compared to the Democrats' 216. The remaining 103 votes are from the battleground and will be decisive on November 5th, determining the outcome of the presidential election. In the 8 toss-up states, Biden maintains his lead in Minnesota. However, recent polls suggest that Trump is currently ahead in other 7 toss-up states. In North Carolina, the gap between candidates stands at 5.8%, while Trump holds a 5.4% lead in Arizona, 5.3% in Pennsylvania, 5.2% in Nevada, and 4% in Georgia. Trump's lead in Wisconsin and Michigan fall within the margin of error of polls, respectively at 2.2 and 0.6%. Analyzing the polling trends reveals that in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, the momentum is in favor of Trump, while in Michigan, it favors Biden. In other toss-up states, there isn't a significant trend. Now when we include RFK Jr. in the polls, the numbers will change slightly. While initially it was believed that RFK Jr.'s presence on the ballot would draw votes away from Biden and potentially benefit Trump, it seems that this is not necessarily the case anymore. As anticipated, the gap between Trump and Biden widens in Arizona, Georgia, and North Carolina, but it shrinks in Pennsylvania and Michigan. It's worth noting that the difference Robert Kennedy makes in almost all of the toss-up states falls within the margin of error, suggesting caution in relying on these changes. However, observing the evolving trend of Kennedy's influence across party lines suggests that he could also disrupt Trump's campaign. After the late June debate between Biden and Trump, where Biden performed poorly, many believed that the election was over. Numerous Democratic officials called for Biden to drop out of the race, and this call persists. However, surprisingly, the polls didn't shift significantly in favor of Trump. Yet, Trump doesn't need a major shift. If the election were held today and the polls proved accurate, he could win the White House back with 312 electoral votes against Biden's 226. The polls have become relatively stable, so if Democrats want to retain the presidency, they need to act sooner rather than later. Can they achieve this mission? We have to wait and see. Thank you for joining, and we look forward to seeing you in the next video.